The Last Garden. The alien delegation stood in stunned silence before the twisted wreckage of what had once been Earth's crown jewel, the orbital sanctuary, humanity's greatest achievement in ecological preservation. Commander Thales of the Kryn Concordat gazed through the viewing port at the shattered ring structure, its broken segments trailing through space like the ribs of some ancient celestial creature. His translator device struggled to capture the weight of his words. "This was your last hope," he said to the human standing beside him. "How do your people continue?" Dr. Sarah Chen smiled, though exhaustion lined every corner of her face. "You don't understand us yet, Commander. This wasn't our last hope. It was just our biggest one." She gestured toward the observation deck where other members of the Concordat had gathered, their crystalline forms refracting the distant sunlight into prismatic patterns across the walls. They had come to document humanity's extinction, to catalog another species that had reached too far and fallen. The sanctuary's destruction 3 months ago had been visible from 17 star systems. Everyone assumed it meant the end. But Sarah had invited them here for a different reason. "Follow me," she said, leading them through corridors that still bore scorch marks from the Cascade failure. The station, once home to 30,000 souls and the genetic repository of 10 million Earth species, now housed barely 300 survivors. They passed observation windows showing Earth below, a planet scarred by climate collapse, its oceans acidified, its forests reduced to memory. Thales had read the reports. Earth's biosphere was in terminal decline. The sanctuary had been humanity's backup plan, a floating ark meant to preserve and eventually restore what had been lost. Its destruction should have ended everything. Yet, the humans kept working, kept moving forward with that peculiar intensity that both fascinated and disturbed the Concordat observers. They entered what had once been the primary gene vault. The cylindrical chamber stretched 50 meters high, its walls honeycombed with storage cells. Most were dark now, their contents lost to vacuum when the hole breached. But in the center of the room, something unexpectedly glowed with soft blue light. A sphere of crystallized atmosphere, maybe 3 meters across, sustained by emergency power. Inside it floated a single seed pod. Acacia tortilis, umbrella thorn acacia, from the Serengeti grasslands. It survived because it was in the testing chamber when the cascade began. We managed to seal this section before total decompression. She touched the control panel, and the sphere slowly rotated, revealing the small brown pod in perfect detail. "This is what you don't understand about humanity, Commander. We don't need hope to survive. We need purpose." Thales felt his colleague, researcher Mivon, press closer. "One seed." Mivon's voice carried the harmonic overtones of disbelief. "From one tree species? This cannot sustain an ecosystem. This cannot restore a world." "You're absolutely right," Sarah agreed, but her smile widened. "Which is why we didn't stop." She opened a secondary panel, and suddenly the room transformed. Holographic displays erupted across every surface, showing hundreds of locations across Earth and in space. When the sanctuary fell, we thought we'd lost everything. 10 million species, gone in an instant. We mourned for 3 days. Then we got back to work. The display showed impossible scenes. In the Arctic waste where tundra had once stretched, teams of humans worked in heated domes, nurturing patches of genetically reconstructed permafrost vegetation. In the dead zones of the Pacific, underwater habitats glowed with bioluminescent algae strains that could survive the acidic waters. In abandoned cities, vertical farms stretched toward the sky, each one a micro-ecosystem designed to preserve and propagate what fragments remained. "We found survivors everywhere we looked," Sarah explained, her voice strengthening with each word. "Seeds in museums, preserved specimens in universities, frozen samples in medical facilities, even DNA fragments in old research papers. We found a viable embryo of a Javan rhinoceros in a lab that had been abandoned for 40 years. We found coral samples in a private aquarium. We found everything we needed scattered across a dying world, hidden in 1,000 forgotten places." Thales watched the humans in the holographic feeds. They worked in environments that would kill most conquered-at species within minutes, toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, crushing pressures. They worked without the advanced technology the sanctuary had provided, using improvised equipment and sheer determination. "This is madness," he whispered. "The genetic diversity is too limited, the contamination too severe. You cannot rebuild from such fragments." "We know," Sarah said simply. "Every xenobiologist in the Concordat has told us it's impossible. The mathematics don't work. The ecology can't stabilize. The genetic bottlenecks will collapse within 3 generations." She turned to face him directly, and Thalos saw something in her eyes that made his crystalline form resonate with involuntary frequency. It was the look he'd seen in the historical records of a dozen extinct species, but never in survivors. It was the look of a people who had already accepted death and chosen to fight anyway. "But here's what your scientists didn't calculate, Commander. They didn't factor in human stubbornness. They didn't account for the fact that we've already survived 6 mass extinctions on our planet. They forgot that humanity's superpower isn't our technology or our intelligence." She gestured toward the floating seed pod. "It's our absolute refusal to accept the inevitable." A soft chime interrupted them. Sarah checked her datapad and smiled. "It's time," she said. "The reason I really invited you here." She led them to the station's primary observation deck. Through the massive viewport, Earth rotated slowly beneath them, a world of browns and grays where blues and greens should be. But as they watched, something changed. Across the planet's surface, lights began to appear. Thousands of them, then millions, spreading across continents in coordinated patterns. Each light represented a restoration site, a fragment of preserved life being planted, released, or activated according to a timeline humanity had been orchestrating for 3 months. "We call it the distributed garden," Sarah said quietly. "When the sanctuary fell, we realized we'd been thinking about preservation all wrong. We'd put everything in one place, one perfect system. We'd forgotten the most important lesson Earth ever taught us. Life survives through diversity, through adaptation, through spreading itself across every possible niche." Thalos watched the lights multiply across Earth's surface. His analytical mind calculated the logistics involved, the coordination required, the sheer impossibility of managing 10 million restoration efforts simultaneously with such limited resources. "How?" he asked. "We stopped trying to save everything," Sarah admitted. "We prioritized keystone species. We focused on genetic diversity over individual preservation. We accepted that we'll lose some species permanently. But most importantly, we stopped working alone." She pulled up another display showing contribution logs. Every nation on Earth is participating. Every surviving research facility. Every person with even basic biological training. We've had volunteers teaching themselves genetic engineering through old textbooks. We've had children helping cultivate seed banks in their homes. The sanctuary was our monument. It was beautiful and perfect and utterly human in its ambition. But this, she gestured to the spreading lights below, this is humanity's true strength. When we fall, we adapt. When we fail, we improvise. When we lose everything, we find new ways to begin again.
The Forgotten Protocols. 6 months after the distributed garden activation, Commander Thalos returned to Earth's orbital space, but this time he wasn't alone. The Galactic Council itself had dispatched a full research fleet, drawn by reports that seemed too extraordinary to be true. As his shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, Thalos reviewed the data streams with increasing disbelief. The numbers weren't just improving, they were defying every ecological model the Concordat had developed over 10,000 years of studying planetary biospheres. Dr. Sarah Chen met him at landing site Gamma 7, formerly known as the Sahara Desert. Thalos emerged from his shuttle into a landscape that matched none of his previous visits' images. Where there should have been lifeless sand stretching to the horizon, he instead found himself standing in a vast field of strange vegetation. The plants looked wrong somehow, too efficient, too purposefully designed. "Welcome to humanity's laboratory," Sarah said, and Thalos noticed she looked different too, healthier, more energized, as if the weight she'd carried before had transformed into momentum. "I assume you've been reading the reports." I have, Thales replied, his translator struggling with the skepticism in his harmonic tones. They're impossible. You've reported successful germination rates of 67% across all biomes. You've established functioning microecosystems in areas that shouldn't support any life for decades. Your oceanic algae strains are reducing acidity levels 3 times faster than predicted. None of this aligns with established xenobiological science. Sarah started walking, and Thales followed, his environmental suit's servos humming as he navigated the uneven terrain. Other humans worked nearby, most without environmental protection despite the harsh conditions. They tended the strange plants with practiced efficiency, taking samples, adjusting irrigation systems that looked cobbled together from salvaged materials. "You're right to be skeptical," Sarah said. "When we started the distributed garden, we knew we couldn't succeed using conventional approaches. We didn't have the resources, the time, or the genetic diversity. So we stopped trying to restore Earth to what it was. Instead, we decided to help it become something new." She led him to an observation post overlooking a valley that had been carved by flash flooding. In that valley, Thales saw something that made his crystalline form pulse with alarm. The vegetation there was moving, not with wind, but with apparent purpose. Vines shifted position to maximize sunlight exposure. Root systems visibly redistributed nutrients. The entire ecosystem seemed to be operating as a single coordinated organism. "What have you done?" Thales asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We remembered something important," Sarah replied. "Earth's life didn't evolve in isolation. It evolved through competition, through symbiosis, through constant adaptation to changing conditions. The sanctuary preserved life as if it were museum pieces, static, unchanging, perfect. But life isn't perfect, Commander. Life is messy and chaotic and endlessly creative." She pulled up a holographic display showing genetic sequences that made Thales's analytical subroutines stutter in confusion. The DNA was clearly terrestrial in origin, but it had been modified in ways that violated standard genetic engineering protocols. "We started combining species, not randomly, but strategically. We took the drought resistance of desert plants and merged it with the growth rate of fast-propagating species. We gave tropical plants cold tolerance. We created hybrid microorganisms that could survive in multiple extreme environments." Thales searched for the words. "That's playing with forces you don't understand. Creating synthetic organisms without proper testing protocols, without evolutionary safeguards. You could create something that destabilizes the entire remaining biosphere." "We already did," Sarah said calmly. "The first synthetic ecosystem we created in what used to be the Amazon consumed all available nutrients in the soil within 3 weeks and collapsed. The second one started producing a toxin that killed every native species in a 50-kilometer radius. We lost 16 researchers studying that failure." She met his gaze without flinching. "Then we learned from our mistakes and tried again, and again, and again." Thales felt something he rarely experienced: genuine fear of another species. Not fear of their weapons or their violence, but fear of their absolute unwillingness to acknowledge limits. "Sarah, the Concordat has strict protocols about genetic experimentation precisely because of scenarios like this. You're risking not just Earth's biosphere, but potentially creating invasive species that could threaten other worlds." "I know," she said, "which is why we built in fail-safes. Every synthetic organism we've created has a genetic kill switch. They're all designed to self-limit after a certain number of generations. They're meant to bootstrap the ecosystem, not replace it permanently." She gestured to the valley below. "What you're seeing down there isn't our end goal. It's a temporary scaffolding. Once these aggressive synthetic ecosystems stabilize the environment and rebuild soil health, they'll naturally give way to the preserved native species we've been cultivating in protected sites." Thales watched a team of humans working in the valley, seemingly unafraid of the genetically modified organisms surrounding them. "How many of these experimental sites do you have?" he asked. Just part of him didn't want to know the answer. 7,342, she replied, spread across every continent and major ocean, each testing different approaches, different species combinations, different environmental strategies. We're running the largest parallel evolution experiment in known history. That's insanity, Thales said flatly. Maybe, Sarah agreed, but it's working. Come on, I want to show you something else. They traveled by ground vehicle to what Sarah called Site Alpha 1, the first successful self-sustaining synthetic ecosystem. The journey took 3 hours, and during that time, Thales saw things that both amazed and horrified him. Forests of hybrid trees that grew at visible rates, their trunks expanding as he watched. Streams filled with water that seemed too clean, too clear, filtered by genetically modified bacteria that consumed pollutants at impossible rates. Swarms of insects that moved in coordinated patterns, pollinating entire fields with mathematical efficiency. Site Alpha 1 had once been a dead zone, an industrial wasteland so polluted that even bacteria couldn't survive there. Now it looked like something from a pre-contact wilderness Hollywood, pristine, vibrant, almost aggressively alive. But as Thales's sensors analyzed the environment, he realized the truth. This wasn't restored nature. This was something entirely new. A woman was waiting for them at the research station. She was older than Sarah, with gray hair and eyes that carried the weight of hard decisions. "Commander Thales," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "I'm Dr. Olana Rodriguez, head of the Synthetic Ecosystem Development Program. Sarah tells me you're concerned about our methods." "Concerned is an understatement," Thales replied, carefully shaking her hand with his manipulator limb. "What you're doing here violates every principle of responsible ecological management." Elena nodded. "You're absolutely right. Under normal circumstances, we'd never attempt anything like this. We'd spend decades running simulations, centuries testing in controlled environments. We'd move cautiously, conservatively, ensuring every modification was thoroughly understood before deployment." She looked out at the thriving ecosystem surrounding them. "But we don't have centuries, Commander. We have maybe 20 years before Earth's biosphere crosses a threshold from which no recovery is possible." She led them to a laboratory carved into the hillside. Inside, hundreds of researchers worked with equipment that looked ancient compared to concordant technology, but they wielded it with practiced precision. "We've had to rediscover techniques humanity abandoned generations ago. Selective breeding, mutation analysis, environmental pressure testing. We're using methods that predate the sanctuary by centuries, combined with genetic engineering that pushes our technology to its absolute limits." Thales watched a young human carefully cross-pollinating 2 plants that his sensors identified as belonging to completely different families. This researcher is 23 years old. She learned genetic engineering from archived university lectures and trial-and-error experimentation. 3 months ago, she created a nitrogen-fixing grass variant that can survive in soil with 70% higher salinity than any natural species. It's now being deployed across 14 coastal restoration sites. "How many people are working on this program?" Thales asked, although part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Directly? About 400,000, Elena replied, "but millions more are involved in supporting roles, growing base stocks, monitoring deployment sites, collecting data, raising preserved species in home habitats. Every human on Earth is part of the distributed garden in some way." Sarah pulled up a holographic projection showing Earth from orbit. Across the planet's surface, the restoration sites had multiplied, spreading like a healing infection across the scarred continents. "We learned something crucial, Commander. We learned that top-down restoration doesn't work. The sanctuary failed because it was centralized, controlled, perfect. So we embraced chaos instead." "Chaos?" Thales asked. "Controlled chaos," Elena clarified. "Each restoration site operates independently."
The New Earth. 15 years after the sanctuary's fall, Commander Thales stood on the observation deck of the Concordant research vessel Eternal Witness, watching Earth rotate beneath him. He'd made this journey 17 times now, documenting humanity's progress with a dedication that had evolved from scientific curiosity into something approaching obsession. Each visit revealed transformations that defied his understanding of ecological science. But this visit was different. This time, he wasn't alone. The observation deck held representatives from 47 Concordat member species, all gathered to witness what human researchers were calling the culmination event. Dr. Sarah Chen, now head of the Integrated Biosphere Recovery Council, stood beside him looking remarkably unchanged despite 15 years of relentless work. Humans, Thalys had learned, were remarkably resilient when given purpose. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah addressed the assembled delegates. 15 years ago, I invited Commander Thalys to witness what we thought might be humanity's last days. Instead, you've all watched us do something unprecedented, rebuild a planetary biosphere from fragments while that planet's inhabitants continued living on it. She gestured to Earth below. Today, we're going to show you the culmination of that work. Thalys had reviewed the preliminary reports, but even his advanced analytical processors struggled to accept what they described. The distributed garden had succeeded beyond humanity's wildest projections. Earth's biosphere wasn't just recovering, it was evolving, transforming into something that had never existed before. "Let's start with the numbers," Sarah continued, pulling up holographic displays that filled the observation deck. Atmospheric oxygen levels have stabilized at 19.3%. Ocean acidification has reversed by 42%. We've successfully reintroduced or recreated 11,800 species across all major biomes, but those numbers don't tell the real story. She changed the display to show time-lapse imagery of Earth's landmasses over the past 15 years. Thalys watched as the brown and gray of dead zones gradually gave way to greens, blues, and golds. But the colors weren't quite right. The greens were too vibrant, the blues too luminous. This wasn't Earth as it had been. This was Earth becoming something new. A delegate from the Vrin Collective, a species known for their conservative approach to ecological management, spoke up. "Dr. Chen, our analysis indicates that 63% of Earth's current biomass consists of synthetic or heavily modified organisms. This isn't restoration, this is planetary engineering." "You're absolutely correct," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We stopped trying to restore Earth to what it was about 8 years ago. That goal became impossible once we accepted the reality of our situation. Instead, we decided to help Earth become what it needs to be." She zoomed the display to show a region that had once been the Amazon rainforest. This area was completely dead, burned, logged, polluted beyond recovery. Traditional restoration would have taken 500 years to establish even basic forest coverage, so we didn't use traditional restoration. The image showed a dense jungle, but one where the trees grew in unusual patterns, where the canopy seemed to shimmer with bioluminescence, where the entire ecosystem pulsed with visible energy. "We call it a bootstrap ecosystem," Sarah explained. "Fast-growing synthetic species designed to rapidly rebuild soil, stabilize climate, and create conditions where preserved native species can eventually take root. But something unexpected happened." She zoomed the display to show a region that had once been the Amazon rainforest. This area was completely dead, burned, logged, polluted beyond recovery. Traditional restoration would have taken 500 years to establish even basic forest coverage, so we didn't use traditional restoration. The image showed a dense jungle, but one where the trees grew in unusual patterns, where the canopy seemed to shimmer with bioluminescence, where the entire ecosystem pulsed with visible energy. "We call it a bootstrap ecosystem,"
Sarah explained. Fast-growing synthetic species designed to rapidly rebuild soil, stabilize climate, and create conditions where preserved native species can eventually take root. But something unexpected happened. She zoomed the display to show a region that had once been the Amazon rainforest and showed the dense jungle where the synthetic and native species had begun to interweave. They're merging. The synthetic organisms are exchanging genetic material with native species through horizontal gene transfer. Earth's biosphere is accepting our modifications and building on them.